What happened to Lindsey Jo Reimer on November 7, 1994? Before we start, take a look at Lindsey Jo Reimer's sister, Kate, who speaks for the first time since the murder, 20 years ago.
Kate, we're approaching the 20th anniversary of your sister being found murdered. I wondered if you could tell us what it was like 20 years ago when you found out your sister had gone missing, and then you're hearing the terrible news of her being found.
I wasn't in Hebden Bridge when we had the news that she disappeared, and my mum had phoned me up to tell me that she wasn't at home, and I felt instantly that something really terrible had happened, because she wasn't the sort of girl to just go off and not let us know where she was. And then we just walked into a nightmare where everything changed. Our whole lives have been exposed to the public, willingly, and wanting to give as much as we can so that we can try and find out what's happened. We spent nearly 5 months not knowing where she was, and then we're informed that she'd been found in the canal close to our family home. And it's just been surreal since then. It feels like we suddenly entered a whole new world where something tragic and terrible and that couldn't be changed happened. And it's been terrible. Every day since then we think of Lindsey. I think of her, my sister. I have children who haven't known their auntie. We miss her. We miss her so much. And everything is tainted. Every memory of her is tainted because of what happened to her, that she was murdered, and her body dumped in the canal. And it's painful and hard. Every day it bleeds into everything that we do. It's been really, really difficult.
And if you had the opportunity, Kate, to speak directly with somebody who knew who the killer was, what would you say to them?
I'd say that it's about time that this finished, that the person responsible for the murder of my sister came forward so that we could move forward in our lives. We've lived with the consequences of this person's actions for 20 years, which is a life sentence for us, and it feels like that there's nothing will change, that this is how we have to live for the rest of our lives, not knowing what's happened, and for the killer to be walking free, whilst we every day live with the grief of what happened 20 years ago. When you go through this and experience a murder of a loved one, you stay in, you're filled with grief from the beginning, and it doesn't go away. It doesn't get easier, but we can't lose the grief and start remembering her with love until the person has come forward so that we can put an end to this and move on.
Lindsey Reimer was 13 years old when she disappeared, just 2 months before the 1990s reached their halfway mark. Lindsey's photograph shows what many will remember to be representative of a 90s teen from that time: hair pulled back from her face with a wavy fringe stiff with hairspray, earrings, and a half smile. Often, we can date the victims in these cold cases through the clothes and the hairstyles as much as from the photo quality. The bald facts of this case are straightforward enough. Lindsey left her home that evening and went to the Spar shop to buy a box of cornflakes. On the way, she stopped at the pub where her mum was having a drink. Her mum asked Lindsey if she wanted a glass of Coke, but Lindsey said no, and made her way onto the Spar, which was the last sighting of her, at 10:22 p.m. Her body was found 6 months later, in April 199, in a canal about a mile away. Lindsey had been strangled. In just a couple of years, Lindsey will have been dead for 30, over twice her life. The UK is a different place. Perhaps because of the lack of social media and 24-hour news, hardly anything remains from what we know for definite about Lindsey's life. Lindsey's background wasn't totally straightforward. Hebden Bridge is now a place famous for its arts and crafts, literary connections, and tolerant outlook towards same-sex couples. However, it's at heart a rural community. Lindsey's background seems to have been loving but complicated. Her mum and dad had been living separately for about a year before Lindsey's disappearance. They had owned a pub in Rochdale which had been forced to close, and under financial pressure, Lindsey's father had lived in a caravan on a farm with Lindsey and her brother Danny. Meanwhile, Lindsey's mum stayed in Rochdale with Lindsey's sisters Katie and Juliet, just a idler. It's fair to say Lindsey probably wasn't living the most conventional of lives at this point, but even in 1994, this wasn't massively unusual for Hebden Bridge. Like many young girls who were either the oldest in the household or the only female, Lindsey took on a motherly role, and I think this partly explains what seems to have baffled some regarding the late-night visit to the Spar to buy something as mundane as cornflakes. It also explains why Lindsey's mum invited her to have a soft drink with her and her friend. Lindsey wasn't as a child, but in her mindset and her role within the family, she was a young woman and was treated as such. So what happened that damp November night when Lindsey vanished? Unfortunately, we don't know. One theory is that Lindsey was a victim of Seville. This is based on the fact that a good friend of Seville owned a caravan about a mile from the farm where Lindsey lived, and that either Lindsey was taken for Seville's own gratification or that she saw something untoward and was murdered. This seems unlikely. Seville had access to any number of young girls to hurt and harm. He didn't need an elaborate plot to gain access to a young woman. It also strikes me as unlikely that Lindsey was murdered to protect Seville's reputation. As we've seen time and again, teenage girls from pre-2010-ish are just not believed when they speak up, especially working-class ones. A DNA profile of the killer was found in 2016. Hopefully, as the years pass, this case can be put to rest. My thinking is this is an awful and horrible crime of opportunity. Someone will have seen Lindsey, alone and small, and do the unthinkable. It's more common than people may think for a one-off crime like this to present itself, as if something dormant has lain inside someone since forever, and then in the right time and place it rises and then goes dormant again. This explains many cold cases here. Interested to know anything else about this case? Thanks for watching.